Welcome to the world of wonder at Paranormal M, where we unravel tales that defy explanation. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to embark on a journey through our latest thought-provoking stories. Enjoy the intrigue. Can y'all help me figure out what something was in Parallel Forest, Oklahoma? So, I need some help figuring out what the hell something was. For context, I'm a 17-year-old girl. Don't know if it's important or not. And I live in Oklahoma. And my mom, grandma, and her dog, and I decided to have a girl's day out, which included going to Parallel Forest for some hiking. It was about sunset-ish when we arrived, and we went hiking. A few minutes of hiking, I sort of noticed a figure within the tree line. It was like Dear God, or The Beast, if you ever played Spooky's Jump Scare Mansion, or watched Over the Garden Wall, but it didn't have flesh nor skin, and it wasn't made of wood, just the antlers, bone, and the skull of a deer. I figured, don't bother it and it won't bother me. Don't be a nuisance to the forest. I eventually separated from my mom. I kept her within view and made sure that she wasn't too far away. My grandma was still in the car at this point in time. And looked around, and eventually found a tipped-over tree and decided, I like rocks. Rocks are cool. And looked down, looking at any particular good-looking ones for my collection. A black one caught my eye, and I took it, and when I stood up, I felt kind of like it was de-reality. That's the only way I can describe it, since it felt exactly as I do when I de-realize. I knew I was in this reality, but something was just very wrong. So I put it down best I could, and how I found it, since it was rather clear that the forest was telling me that it wasn't mine, and I wasn't allowed to keep it. Then everything just kept being wrong. It was blowing wind, but it was only the sound of wind. There was zero movement. There was zero sound within the forest, like it all just froze. And then I felt a sort of feeling I've never felt before. Like whatever that thing I saw earlier was, it was trying its damnedest to trick me. I went to my mom and explained something was trying to trick me, and we decided to leave. We ran into Grandma, and I asked Mom if it really was her, and Mom just said, we'll find out. So, we began walking. Mom had me hold her hand and stay on the path, and we began sort of hearing a crow, but it wasn't a crow. It was like it was trying to mimic a crow, but took breaths in between to cry or scream. We kept walking. I walked a bit ahead. I'm a fast walker and wanted to get out of there, but didn't want to run for obvious reasons. And it just kept getting louder. In the way some creatures get louder the further away they are. It was figuring out where we were through noise and wanted us to make noise. I tried telling my grandma and mom to be quieter, but they refused and kept trying to speak to them. Quite in character for them. That's not odd in the slightest, but it kept going for me specifically to the point that it was directly on top of me. I decided to put away the crow act, or it did, and began mimicking an owl, and I just felt incredibly sick, like possibly anxiety sick, since I do have an anxiety disorder. Whenever we left the forest, it began mimicking a coyote for some reason, and just kept going even as we left. Is it normal for black-eyed kids to act like this? I've been visiting my dad for the summer, and the house is incredibly haunted and immensely polite. The ghosts have amazing manners, even if they're mischievous. And my sisters mentioned a black-eyed blonde boy with bangs trying to get into the house and get their attention. My stepmom mentioned seeing him, and he just thinks the girls are very pretty and wants to collect them like rocks. He's 10 years old. My stepmom is a badass who makes every spirit her bitch. Like at one point, she threatens to purify a demon if it kept acting rude, and that her quote-unquote pagan shit is much more dangerous than that Christian bullshit, and managed to get it to help her with her job. So she did what she normally does. She told him that he's not allowed inside, nor to hurt us. The experiences have since dialed down for me personally. But one of the first few nights, I woke up to a child giggling in my ear, and something at the door, and just thought, well, that's very rude of you, and went directly back to sleep. Whenever I'd shower, I felt like somebody was watching me. And so did the girls. And my stepmom told him that he was breaking the rules and was being a perv, and how impolite that was. Well, at one point I was switching my laundry, turned, and saw a little blonde boy with bangs in overalls and a multicolored long-sleeve shirt. He was on the couch. I didn't see his eyes and decided to ignore it, since, well, my mom taught me, if you see something, no you didn't. If you heard something, no you didn't. Well, a few nights ago, she thought Marigold, the spirit of my possessed doll, she's very friendly since I got her, was just visiting, since she felt a child's ghost in the house. And the littles play, well, I guess their play habits have changed. I responded with, "No, there's a little boy," and explained what I saw. Well, she got mad but just accepted it because he was playing by the rules. Some of my stuff's been going missing, as well as more often. But I just need to ask for it back, and I get it. I've met a black-eyed person before, but what I felt when I met the black-eyed man was pure and unfiltered fear and panic. Even just by passing by him, he terrified me. This kid is just playing with the littles and doesn't seem like much harm. Is this normal? Is there a difference between black-eyed adults and children? Are some people immune to paranormal experience? In parentheses, me. Myself and said coworker were cleaning up the bar and restaurant that we work at. It's late, maybe like 2 a.m., and we're closed. She's toward the back, and I'm in the front. It's just us and our manager in the back room. We're maybe 10 meters apart. There's a big glass panel dividing us, and a doorway to the side. But we can see and hear each other perfectly. We're silently packing chairs away and cleaning tables, and I hear her gasp loudly. I turn around and look at her through the glass and say, "What?" She's just looking around as if she's heard something. "What?" I say again, and she starts saying, "I heard knocking." I'm about to tell her that I didn't hear anything, when her eyes shoot up from the glass panel between us and she yells, "Oh my God!" Her eyes are clearly fixed on something moving across the glass. I look upwards where she's looking and I see nothing. I yell again, "What is it?" She looks down at me aghast and says, "Did you really not fucking see that?" She's spooked as hell, and I'm confused. By that time, the manager comes out and asks what the commotion is all about. Coworker says she heard knocking and then saw a shadow move across the glass. I said that I didn't see or hear any of this. She thinks I'm crazy. I think she's crazy. But wait, there are security cameras. As we check the footage, you can hear a distinct knocking before the coworkers gasp. Then, obviously, you see me coming over saying, "What?" And I shit you not, on the security footage, you see a faint shadow move across the glass. As my coworker watches while I look around trying to see what she sees. I didn't see or hear any of this while it was happening, only on the footage. Why could my coworker sense it at all, but I couldn't? How on earth did I not hear and see this when it was happening? But I could on the security and audio video recording. It also reminded me of when I was young. My brother and I walked into a room, and he said he felt a creepy vibe, and it was weird, and I felt nothing. The room felt normal. Are some people immune to paranormal phenomena? Are there some that can see it and some who simply can't? Sixth sense of death. Trigger warning / death warning. I don't know where else to talk about this. Ever since I was a kid, I've been able to sense death. I can see it up close, as in I can look into someone's face and see that they're close to death. I always thought that was kind of interesting because it would happen when I'd meet my friend's parents or family. On more than one occasion, I would look at their face and just see gray, black eyes with major bags underneath them. But then I'd look at pictures of them and see the complete opposite. Next, I'd hear of them either dying of an illness, a car accident, or gun violence. I just figured this was a coincidence. But then as I got older, it became different. It started with my grandmother. She was sick for a while, but one night I looked in the mirror, and it was my face that looked drained, old, sunken. And I'd be tired, unexplainably tired. The next day, I was told that she died. It happened with my father, too. He wasn't even ill, and I was halfway across the world, and it happened again. I was getting ready to go out to another country, and I looked in the mirror, and sure enough, I looked just like I'd emerged from the crypt and felt like I could use a nap. A few hours later, my mom called and told me that he had passed from an aneurysm. This has happened 10 to 15 times that I can remember. I never know who it's going to be, but if it's someone I know, I'll always get that drained look and get extremely tired. I've only ever told my partner. I had to, because it happened one day where I looked so gray and I was so tired that my partner thought I was getting really sick and took me to the hospital. When we got to the hospital, I started to turn around, and sure enough, we got a call letting us know that his friend was murdered at a Toronto nightclub. Anyways, I just want to make sure I'm not crazy and see if anybody else has had the same experience. It sounds wild, but it's never failed. It doesn't scare me anymore, and if anything, I'd like to learn more about it. Midnight Taco Run. A bit of background. My husband and I have been together since the 8th grade. I was 13 and he was 14 in 1997. That, in and of itself, is difficult for people to believe, but we've been together 26 years now, so we know each other pretty well. However, in the beginning, my husband, I'll call him Nick, was closed off about certain things. For instance, he didn't tell me that his mom legally changed his name when he was 5, until we were in college. I knew that his father's side of the family called him by what I thought was his middle name, but I had no idea that they'd been using his original first name. When I asked why, he didn't tell me. He said that he didn't think it was that important. Anyway, I can't remember the first time something paranormal came up, but Nick very reluctantly told me that he could sometimes see things that most couldn't. This astonished me, as I've never thought of him as the type to even believe in the paranormal. But instead, he not only believed, but lived with it on nearly a daily basis. I told him that I believed him and was curious about all the things that he could see. And I asked for him to share his experiences with me as he experienced them. At first, he was uncomfortable doing so, but when he realized that I was genuinely interested and not out to make fun of him, he began opening up about it and sharing almost every time he saw something, unless it was something that he felt he shouldn't acknowledge. So, on to the story. One night in early October, in about 2008 or 2009, we decided to take a midnight snack run to our favorite taco place. I was driving that night, and when I turned onto our neighborhood, on our way home, I saw what I thought was a grayish trash bag blowing in the nearby stop sign at the end of the street. Nick and I had been oddly giggly and having a good time making each other laugh over silly things all night. So it was odd when I asked Nick what that thing on the side of the road was, and he didn't answer. I glanced at him to see if he had heard my question and asked him again, and he still didn't answer me. As we got closer, I noticed that the way that this thing was moving made it look like a large dog. As I pulled up to the stop sign, I could no longer see the thing, as it was on Nick's side of the truck. I looked at Nick again and asked yet another time, what was it while craning my neck trying to see? I said, "Is that a dog?" His attitude had changed completely from just a few seconds earlier. He was no longer smiling, and he was slouched way down in his seat. When I asked if it was a dog, Nick ever so slightly shook his head no with his eyes directly forward. He looked, well, not normal. At this point, I was confused and getting irritated at him for not responding to my question. Then I saw the gray dog thing run away from the truck toward the adjacent yard, and started to wonder why Nick was acting so strange about a dog. I was on the verge of saying something to the effect of, "Nick, when the dog jumped straight up into the air and disappeared." Whatever I was going to say evaporated, and I looked at Nick. He was now shielding his face with his hand in a way that you might do if you were trying to avoid someone seeing you, while whispering frantically, "Please go, please go, please go." Then, to add to the completely bizarre situation unfolding in front of me, a cat from across the street yowled and screamed as it came tearing across the street toward the area I'd seen whatever it was disappear. The cat's tail was 3 times its normal size, and it looked prepared to fight to the death. I said, "What the fuck did I just see?" as I felt every hair on my body stand on end in a way I'd never experienced before. Nick said dryly, "That was a cat." I floored the truck and said, "I'm not talking about the f***ing cat." I was terrified but fascinated by what I'd just witnessed. He still made no reference to the dog thing. After we returned home, I was still freaked out, and Nick was a little paranoid that it might have been following us, and he kept looking out the window. When he felt comfortable again, I asked him what he saw. He was reluctant to say much, but he said that after I saw it disappear, he could still see it. It had been sitting in a tree branch near his window, which had been down the whole time, by the way. It had been looking toward the truck with a rat dog-like face with long, sharp teeth. What I personally saw was a dog-shaped thing. I didn't see its head, so I can't really describe it, but its body and tail looked like it had sharp angles and was a dark, steely gray. It made me think of the M. Night Shyamalan movie, The Lady in the Water, that had dog-like creatures called scrunts that were covered in blades of grass. However, when discussing the incident with Nick recently, he recalled that it almost looked as though it were covered with pointed scales, almost like armor. But the most bizarre thing for me was the way that it disappeared. It seemed like it went through an Acme black hole from the Looney Tunes cartoon that was suspended in mid-air. In other words, it was as though my vision into this other dimension was restricted to a finite cube of space. And when it jumped out of that space, it left my scope of perception. While it was jumping, its head was out of the space while its body and tail were still in it. I have no idea if this description makes sense or not. Well, I'm getting it. This experience was bizarre and at the same time incredibly creepy. But when I think about it now, I feel incredibly lucky to not only have been granted a glimpse into something so otherworldly, but to have been able to share that experience with my best friend. Sleeping encounter. I'm cat-sitting at my mom's this week and forgot some personal items at my apartment. My boyfriend and I had made plans for him to come by this morning, before or after his gym, to drop them off. All the doors are locked, and he's got the key to the house. So around 6:45 in my half-asleep state, I hear from quite far someone open the front and my boyfriend's voice saying, "Hello," like he usually does to announce his presence. I was very drowsy and was very much on the edge of being asleep and half asleep. Then I felt him come into my room and give me a quick kiss on the cheek, just like he usually does. That made me fall completely asleep. So approximately an hour passed, and I was pretty much fully awake. I looked at my phone. I start texting my boyfriend, thanking him for dropping off my things and telling him how sweet he is. I start looking for the bag with my belongings in it and can't seem to find it. So I ask him where he dropped it off, and he says, "In my car." I'm like, "What do you mean in your car? You didn't drop it here yet?" So turns out my boyfriend is currently at the gym, and I'm waiting for him while I'm writing this, sorry. I'm stunned, shocked, confused. I have no idea how to explain what happened, because I swear on my life I could feel the kiss on my cheek, and I heard his voice say, "Hello," in that very specific little tone that he takes sometimes. I'm a very light sleeper, so I get woken up by pretty much any loud noise around me, and the front door is not the most silent one to open or close. My 2 a.m. paranormal experience with a ghost. First, I want to say that I come from a Muslim family and culture, and I believe that we aren't alone in this world, and that there's other entities, such as jinns, around us, and sometimes they may do some paranormal stuff that can't be rationalized. So with that being said, one time I was about to sleep around 2 a.m., and as I'm doing so, I see the kitchen light suddenly get turned on. At first I thought it was my mom at the kitchen for whatever reason, and then shortly after I hear plates making noises, as if someone is just fiddling with the plates. At the time, I used to sleep at my parents' bedroom, where my mom sleeps, due to my room being under construction. My dad at the time wasn't in the house, since he was somewhere else for work, so it was pretty much me sleeping in an inflatable bed on the ground, and my mom sleeping on the bed. So as the noises and the light being turned on was happening for about 3 to 5 minutes, then all of a sudden it turned off, and it was complete darkness and silence for a bit. I kept staring at the door, thinking that my mom would come back, and after 1 minute, I grabbed my phone and put on the flashlight, and found my mom still asleep, like she had never left the room. I woke her up and told her what happened, and she was very weirded out about the situation. I pretty much didn't want to go check and just recited the Ayat al-Kursi for protection from such spirits and jinns, and went back to sleep, mainly because I knew it couldn't be a burglar in the house, and no burglar would be stupid enough to go into the kitchen and turn on the lights and make some noticeably loud noises with the plates. Thus, I figured it had to be some sort of ghost paranormal activity. I was always skeptical about such entities, though that turn of events made me believe that there are spirits in this world. We have shortly moved after from that house, for other unrelated reasons, and now I from time to time do think about the whole situation of it being some sort of spirit in the house, as it cannot really be explained. This just happened, where a ghost just said in my aunt's voice, "Assalamu alaikum." This just happened today, and I'm freaking out. So my grandparents' house is haunted. Pretty much my cousins and I believe it. We've had many experiences where we heard whistling, seen figures, heard noises, had dreams of people that we don't know, or heard mimicking voices. Now, I've never experienced anything till today. So for starters, my uncle, aunt, and cousin went away on a trip recently. My other aunt and other cousin were out as well. My grandmother was downstairs with her headphones on, and she has a hearing problem, so she can't hear us. And my grandfather was also upstairs. He was sleeping. So we often come visit every day, at the same time, because my sister is autistic. So I rang the Ring doorbell because the lock wasn't working, because sometimes it glitches and fixed itself later because of exposure to the sun. So I unlocked the door, and I hear my aunt's voice say, "Assalamu alaikum." So I said the greeting back, but then it clicked for me. My aunt's not here. So, coming from inside the house in my aunt's room, and it was her voice. so I rushed around to see. I called my other aunt and asked if she was here and told her. She told me to ask if my aunt did it through the Ring app. Now keep in mind the Ring is very new, and they never really used it before. So when I called her, she had no idea that she could even do that. So then I started freaking out. I couldn't even say the prayer because I couldn't remember. My aunt called me back and said that she'd got it on the recording. I'm not allowed to show it because of privacy and don't have permission, but it's on camera. For the rest of the time, I felt the basement was colder than normal, and I felt too anxious to even go upstairs. I don't know who mimicked my aunt's voice, but for a jinn to say Assalamu alaikum like that, I'm hoping it was a good jinn. Need help figuring out what happened? There's a trail that's only big enough for select off-road vehicles. The gate is small enough that no vehicle can enter it. We were able to get in on one of the smaller side-by-sides and started the trail. About a mile, the side-by-side I was in needed to stop and use the bathroom, so we fell about a mile behind the lead side-by-side. The driver of mine decided to try and hit a puddle after we started driving again and ended up hitting a stump and flipping over. We were pretty stuffed and half by the side-by-side was nearly crushed, so we couldn't get out. So less than 5 seconds after we stop rolling, these 3 random men in their 20s start pulling us out of the vehicle and helping us. The weird part is they drove a 1980 Chevy Blazer, which is far too big to be able to get onto this trail. Also, we didn't see them behind us at all. This trail is surrounded by trees, and every entrance is only big enough for small off-road vehicles. These 3 men helped us out a few minutes, and those minutes went by, and the 6 of us, 3 in the side-by-side and 3 random men, were working on flipping the side-by-side back over. That's when the other side-by-side got back and helped out. We took a few minutes to talk to each other, and by the time our focus shifted back to the 3 men, their vehicle and them were gone. We didn't hear a vehicle start, and everyone there at the time 100% saw them. The Bayport Experience. Okay, so about 21-ish years ago, my mother was able to buy her first house and got it for a very good price. I remember being quite excited to have my own bedroom, and every day after school, my mom would bring me to our new house while her and my grandmother cleaned up the place. And because I was there, I was able to pick my own room. The room I had chosen had an old Cheerio cabinet with an old creepy doll, an old music box, and a few other broken tools. I asked my mom if I could keep the music box and started to play with it while my mother cleaned. Eventually, my grandmother found an old beaten-up journal, and my mother and her started to read it. I'll never forget the 2 entries. Why did she make me do this? She knows how I get. Why couldn't she have just kept her mouth shut? Entry 2. I miss her every day. I don't think I can go on without her anymore. I only heard these because I had eavesdropped on my mother and grandmother. They decided to get rid of the journal because of how creepy it was. But we eventually moved, we moved the book. And that's when the weirdest thing started to happen. My family were convinced that the house might be haunted, but nothing directly was happening until they did. Encounter number 1. I was watching TV, the pilot episode of Ned's Declassified School Survivor Guide, when something strange started to happen on my TV. The volume went super high and my remote stopped working. My brother and stepdad ran in, and the channel started to change as the volume got louder. My stepdad said something about it being a deaf ghost. Then the volume went to mute, and followed by the power going out completely. My stepdad looked at the breaker box and could find nothing wrong with it. Encounter 2. My brother and his friend were playing on the computer and started to hear strange noises. They went to investigate and heard the sound of a train. We lived very far away from the train stations, like there was no possible way that we could have heard them. But then they said a red-haired girl standing in the living room. When they turned back, she was gone. Encounter 3. I was sitting in the dining room alone. My brother was in his room, getting ready for our grandmother to pick us up and take us to the pool club. When I started eating, I felt something odd, and my chair legs broke. As I slammed on the ground, I saw a black, shadowy figure. My brother and my dog ran toward me, and he got freaked out. Again, my stepdad looked over for what was wrong, and he said it looked like the legs were kicked in. Bad things started to occur. I got extremely sickly and nearly died. But after leaving the house, the bad energy followed. We had misfortune in every house we moved into after that. House 1, black mold, aka Stachybotrys. House 2, landlord forgot to promise our house to his in-laws. Or he forgot that he had promised the house to his in-laws. House 3, electrical issues nearly burned down the place. My brother had realized one of our blankets was in his closet when he had first moved into the Bayport house. He begged my parents to get rid of it. So, one night when we were at a camping trip, my mother dropped the blanket in the fire. And everything seemed to get better, albeit slowly. And here's the crazy thing. The music box was stolen by my cousin when I was 10, still living in the house at the time. And, well, nothing but bad things started happening to him that eventually led to his death. But here's a few strange notes about that house. There was a stain on the maroon kitchen walls. It wasn't until I was older did I realize that that kind of stain only shows up if she painted over blood. 2. The previous owner of the house reported his girlfriend as missing, not dead. Claimed she ran away after a fight. 3. The realtor who sold my mother the house said the girl died in a car accident, but there was a large blood stain on her dining room wall. 4. There was a crawl space we could never access. We were never given the key. But if you went into the basement area where the crawl space would logically lead to, there was a door that was sealed away with black electrical tape, with pipes built over it. My stepfather and his own father looked it over and realized the pipes didn't connect to anything. One last weird note. When I was playing while my mother and grandmother were cleaning the house before we moved it, I saw something very strange. A shirtless child chasing a dog. Now at the time we didn't have a dog, but a year later we got my first dog, and she had stolen my shirt while I was getting dressed. Chased her and realized as I did, I had seen the exact same thing a year earlier. The Ghost Cat, a night I can't forget. Years ago, around a decade back, my friend and I were part of the same Marine Corps Reserve unit. The distance to our unit from my place was a good 2.5 hours. One particular day, we were required to report early. To save time, we decided I'd stay at his place, situated halfway between my home and the drill center. After a night of barracks cuts and a couple of beers, my friend, looking a bit troubled, confided me about an unusual problem with the house that he was renting. He believed it was haunted by a ghost. Being a skeptic, couldn't help but tease him. But his response was not what I expected. He looked straight into my eyes and uttered, "It's a damn cat." He recounted incidents where he'd wake up to see the cat lounging outside his bedroom. Each time, he would leap out of the bed to catch it. But by the time he'd reached the doorway, just 5 to 7 feet away, it would vanish. I laughed it off, attributing it to his imagination, and decided to crash on the living room couch. The stillness of the night was interrupted when I felt something brushing against my hand, which dangled off the couch. As I peered down, I was met with the sight of a cat affectionately rubbing its head against my hand. Panic set in as I realized I was paralyzed. The dreaded sleep paralysis. While my body was immobile, my willpower drove me to make a tiny movement. In a desperate attempt to prove its existence, I managed to grip that cat's face with my index finger, trying to nick my finger on its sharp tooth. Suddenly, the cat wrenched free and started straight through to the living room wall. The moment its tail disappeared, the paralysis lifted. Frantically, I inspected my finger. While there was no visible injury, I could faintly feel where the tooth had pressed against it, and there seemed to be a slight discoloration. The next day, still bewildered, I narrated the previous night's events to my friend. I may never know the truth of that night, but part of me is convinced that I held onto a ghostly feline, even if just for a fleeting moment. The most uncanny thing? It behaved just like any ordinary cat. Have you ever walked into something invisible? Okay, I know how this sounds, but this is a serious question. About 15 years ago, I was getting ready for bed. Turned off all the lights, one by one. The light in my bedroom was on, so I was turning off all the other lights and going into my room. I picked up my cat like a baby and turned off the last light in the living room. It was a straight shot to my bedroom with nothing obstructing the way. As I was passing my couch with my cat in my arms, I bounced off of something that wasn't there. Like, literally. Imagine someone walking directly into a wall, but the wall is invisible. Even stranger, the moment I collided with whatever it was, I got a rushing wave of heat all through my body, starting from my toes to my head, and then immediately an ice-cold chill from the top of my head all the way down to my toes. My cat reacted with a long, stressed-sounding meow, indicating that he sensed something was off as well. I've never had this happen again since. I was just wondering if anyone else out there had something similar happen. It scared me so much that I slept with the lights on for the better part of 2 weeks. So there's this mausoleum. This was many years ago now, but this place is imprinted into my memory. It was a mausoleum and cemetery within walking distance of my apartment in New Jersey. I had a few experiences with that place, but the creepiest one was the day I walked past it, and it was open. FYI, I walked past this place a lot, and lived in that apartment for a few years, and only saw it open this one time. So I'm walking by one afternoon, and I notice the sign is out stating, quote unquote, visiting hours. Never saw it open before, so I decided to check it out. Even though a couple of the other experiences had already happened outside of here, I figured I'd set my mind at ease. Spoiler, I didn't. So I walk in. The first thing I see is a very long marble-floored hallway with drawers in the walls. Expected. Unexpected were the strange gated parlor chairs that were sort of tables behind wrought iron gates, spaced every so often. Then I heard footsteps. You know how footsteps and shoes can echo on hardwood floor, or hard floor in general? So I say, "Hello," and nothing. Footsteps get louder, so I loudly say, "Hello?" No response. The sound of footsteps is loud enough to sound like it's right around the corner. At this point, with no reply, I'm out. Honestly, had enough weird things happen to me by this place and totally didn't want to see what was making the sound. I went past that place many times after that day. For a while around the same time, it was never open again. I saw something and I can't stop thinking about it. I work the third shift. I go to many different locations and clean. One of the locations I go to has deers and bunnies. I've encountered deer before, and I know to keep my distance. Toward the end of my shift, which is around 4 a.m. to 5 a.m., my coworker and I are in charge of taking out the trash. Next to this location is like a field with trees next to a park. In this area, it's always foggy in the morning. It's close to a river. We begin to bring the trash to the back of the building, where the dumpsters are. I was next to the dumpster, ready to lift my huge bag of trash, but something just told me to look. I turned to my right, and across the street is a very tall, extremely skinny deer with huge antlers. While I stared at it, I couldn't stop thinking, what's wrong with its knees? Its knees were just so huge compared to the thin leg bones. This deer was extremely tall, and it began to walk towards my coworker and I. Its leg was so long, and it wasn't moving correctly. The legs were just too long. Then another one appeared next to the first one. Due to the fog, they looked gray, not cream or brown, but this grayish color. Their eyes were glowing, and they just stared at us. I no longer wanted to look at these things, but my body kept telling me to look. I was afraid they were getting to charge, or maybe attack us. I turned to run, and my coworker was already running toward the door. They didn't make any sound. These deer were extremely quiet. Something just wasn't right with these deer. They gave me an uncanny feeling. These deers were well over 6 feet tall. Saw a ghost. Years ago, I had the following experience. My boyfriend and I at the time had watched a film, and he said I'll take it back to the rental place, which was down the road from my house. It was late afternoon and my parents were home. While he was returning the rental film, I was waiting in the porch and looking at the house across the road, where a boy had lived and died in a car accident a month before. The boy had been about 14 when he died. I was looking into the house and thinking about him when I saw a figure appear slowly in the front window of the house. I could see a figure wearing a blue jacket, jeans, and could see a head but no facial features. Just a pink kind of mottled face. Then the figure began to vibrate side to side, which was fairly frightening to see. I was, of course, shocked and scared. I turned back into the house, and my mom said, "What's the matter?" I told her I saw something strange, and told my boyfriend also. I don't think they believed me, but I saw it for sure. I feel still to this day kind of amazed and in awe of what it is that I saw. Feel honored really to have witnessed it. I've only told 4 or 5 people. Sort of felt that I would maybe get looked at as being strange. I was about 20 years old at the time. I'm now 48 and still remember it clear as day. Was this a skinwalker, or demon, or something else? This is something that I experienced about 4 or 5 years ago. I had some friends over from out of town, a few. We were talking about paranormal experiences that we had in the past. During the conversation, we experienced a few odd things. At first, it was just a lot of loud walking upstairs. We were home alone, and it wasn't any of us. That part wasn't very weird to me. My family and I had already believed the spirit of the previous owner was still in the house. We had a lot of experience with her, and a neighbor had told us that she died in the garage of the house. But as we continued with our stories, one of my friends saw what looked like a large black bird flying up my staircase. When we checked, we didn't see anything there. But since we all had our own personal reasons to believe in the paranormal, we decided that this was a sign to stop and change the subject. After that thing settled down, my friend left the next day and went home. A few days after the friends had left, I woke up in the middle of the night. I think it was some time after midnight. And as I would normally do, I went downstairs, got some water from the garage. When I grabbed the water from the pack, I looked up, and very close to me, I saw a figure standing there. It was very clear. It stood about 7 or 8 feet tall. Its arms, legs, and torso looked like a very muscular man. Its head looked like a massive wolf. Its skin and fur was black like charcoal. As soon as I saw it, I bolted back into the house, locked the garage, and went straight to my room. The energy coming off of it was utterly terrifying. It's the only paranormal experience I've had that I actually felt like I was in real danger. I did move from that house a year ago, but still to this day, I've yet to have anyone able to give me a solid ID on what it is that I saw. Personally, I think it was either a demon or a skinwalker. I know there is a Native American reservation not far from the house. Additionally, just outside of the neighborhood, there was a decent-sized plot of empty land that was owned by the Air Force. My family and I had seen 2 massive coyotes, bigger than anyone in my family has ever seen, just wandering the neighborhood. I know this sounds like something out of a movie, and I don't have any pictures or videos to back up my experience, but for what it's worth, I promise this is what I experienced. My first encounter with a friendly spirit. It was the summer of 2009. My family and I had just moved into our new home, and not long after, weird things would happen from time to time. My room is located at the end of a narrow hallway, and back then, my sister and I would share my room. The idea behind paranormal things always scared me senseless. But because I've never experienced anything related to that myself, I was a little skeptic, but I still believed in it a little. At the time, I was 11 years old, and my sister and I were in bed, about to go to sleep. I don't know how long I had my eyes shut, but I believe at the time my sister had already fallen asleep. She was on the right side of the bed that was adjacent to the wall, while I was on the left side that was open to the rest of the room. I was sleeping with my right arm hanging over the side of the bed, facing away from my sister, when all of a sudden I heard a whisper near my ear saying my name. I thought nothing of it since it was maybe just me being pretty sleepy at the time, but then my arm started to lift up. This woke me up and I just slowly pulled my arm back toward me, because I knew that you weren't supposed to get scared because they feed off of that energy, and to just simply ignore it. Don't get me wrong, I was freaking out internally, but I played it cool, and I just scooted closer to my sister and forced myself to go to sleep. Even though I was scared, and in general I get scared very quickly, I didn't feel like it was a bad spirit. Maybe it could have been a loved one of the previous family, or someone else that lived in our home and just wanted to let us know that they were here. Who knows? Anyway, that was my first experience, but definitely not the last. My sister, along with a few relatives who would stay with us for a certain time, also experienced things, if you'd like to hear more about that. Ask Reddit. I haven't experienced it directly, but my sister and I shared a room when we were children. When she was maybe 6 years old, making me 12 at the time, there were a few weeks where she would wake up in the middle of the night absolutely terrified. When asked about it, she said that an older lady she doesn't know stood next to her bed, threatening to kill her if she didn't return. Or rather, didn't return her daughter to her. My sister said that this lady's appearance was usually preceded by a dream. In this dream, she saw the woman and her daughter chased and killed by a group of men. This was dismissed by her parents, but I saw how she was getting more and more scared as time went on. This wasn't a nightly occurrence, but regular enough for me to become concerned and tell my sister to wake me up the next time that it happened. At this point, it should be noted that we have bunk beds. When my sister woke me up on the next occasion, I was pretty frightened myself, as her fear was quite genuine. Still, I looked over the side of the bed, where my sister said the woman was standing previously. I can confirm that I did not see a thing, for which I remain thankful, and did my best to explain this apparent apparition that my sister is very sorry to see what she had experienced. Confusing. But that there was nothing that could do except offer our condolences and ask that she please not scare my sister anymore. My sister said that the lady was listening. I felt like an utter fool in the morning, but my sister said that she never saw the lady again, which is all I wanted out of it anyway. Ask Reddit. This was a few years ago. was in the car with my mom on the way home from visiting a friend. It was winter in Canada, so there was a ton of snow. Driving is hard. The car ends up getting stuck in the snow. For those who don't know, it's extremely difficult to get a car out of the snow because the wheels would lose grip and just keep spinning. Often you need to get a tow truck, tie chains, put it all on the wheels, put wooden planks down, or have at least 3 strong guys to push the car, or all the above. As my mom and I were figuring out what to do, as we had nothing to get the car unstuck, I see a girl standing about 10 feet away. She must have been crossing the road and noticed us. The thing is, I didn't see her walk up to us. She looked to be in her maybe early 20s. She just looked like a normal person, with dark shoulder-length hair. Was wearing black winter clothes. She had on a backpack as well. She signaled that she was going to try pushing the car from behind. We nod. My mom tries driving, but no luck. My mom said, "Go out and help her push the car." As I went to unbuckle my seatbelt, the car went forward as if there was no snow at all. And as I said before, it doesn't just get unstuck that easy. As we drove, we both turned to wave and thank the girl, but she was gone. There's nowhere she could have gone in such a short amount of time. And to be honest, there's no way that she could have pushed that vehicle by herself out of the snow. We haven't seen her since. And I always wonder who or what she was. Ask Reddit. 1. Big man. When I was younger, like 5 to 7, I would often talk about a black shadow that I could see on my walls. I called him Big Man. My total memory of the events are very faded, but the only memorable moments I can recall is 1. When my old stepdad was getting on to me. One night for not going to bed, and he stood in my doorway. I said to him, "Big man is going to get you," and he went running away. Apparently, my parents were terrified of this shadow. 2. It felt like a normal day for a kid, because my mom and Mima just took me to the park. It turned into an ambush, though, and apparently they wanted to talk about this shadow that I would see and that I would talk to. They asked if I felt like it was evil, and I was like, no. He makes me feel safe. I don't remember a lot of what we talked about, only that it was serious enough that they wanted to take me out of the house to talk about it. 3. I hadn't seen Big Man in years, since around 7 or 8, and moving away from that house that I lived in at the time, until one day when my mom had gotten remarried, and we were living with my mom and my now stepdad. We lived in a trailer in the woods, and we had no neighbors, and I would often go play outside. One day I stepped out onto the porch and saw a giant black shadow beside a tree. It was as if it had sucked me into it. However, this overwhelming sense of dread and fear sank into me as I couldn't look away. I ended up praying to God to help me, and I finally could look away. I ran away into the bathroom after that, and the memories of the Big Man came back to my then teenage self. UFO. This happened to not just me, but my best friend as well. We were young, angsty teens with family problems and relationship issues to boot. We often talked deeply to one another, and our friendship was rich. One night, when we were about 15 or 16, we were just ending a deep conversation that we were having, but being as it was 2 a.m., we were lying in the middle of the road. Super dangerous, I know, but it was a small town, and you could hear and see in both directions quite a ways. So we didn't really, care at the time. And we didn't really care if we got ran over anyway. Back to the story. We were laying there in a solemn silence when a giant blue light came above us. About 1,000 feet or so, zero noise, it hovered, stayed still for 3 seconds, and then instantly zoomed away up beyond eyesight. After a half second passed, he popped up and was like, "Did you see that?" I was like, "Hell yes, I did." And we went running off toward the house, scared shitless. To this day, no one believes us and thinks that we were just foolish stoners. We weren't high then. Ask Reddit. Moving into my old house, we always felt off in the basement. My ex-wife would feel as if she's being watched, or I felt as if I couldn't breathe. The door at the top of the stairs leaned inwards and was always opening from gravity. The doorknob broke off, and it was a super old door, so couldn't get a replacement. But every so often, as I would leave the basement, the door would slam shut as soon as I neared it. The old man that lived there long ago liked woodworking, and so there were a lot of shelves down there. I used them all, like 8 or 9. But needed more, and searched around his storage shed, just not finding anything. Then would randomly find another shelf underneath the workbench where the others had been. Ended up with like 13 shelves. My friend would see a men's shadow walking in our kitchen. When we would sit outside at the fire and no one was inside, he would see what looked like a man in the kitchen. One night, while upstairs sleeping, I needed to pee. It was like 3 a.m. As I rolled over, I noticed that my white shorts with those big plastic beads from the 80s and 90s that kids made jewelry with. She had curly blonde hair and blue eyes, but she was glowing white. Her arms outstretched, and she was just looking at me. That's when I noticed behind her shadows, mostly shapeless, some animal-like. They were black or really dark purple with a purple aura and purple eyes. They did not look friendly. We were almost trying to get out, but couldn't get past her. I couldn't talk. I just rolled back over and rolled the blanket over my head and held in my pee. For a little context on the girl, when I was a baby, my mom brought me to see her cousin and his daughter. This ghost girl looked like the pictures I've seen of this cousin. She was murdered very shortly after we had been there. Then, a few years after that, in my nerd room, I had this Funko in the top corner on the shelf that a couple times just flew off toward me. The only window in the room was behind me, so that was odd. Also had a picture hung above a door fall off and onto the other side of the door. Sure, it could have bounced out, but you have to slide the picture up, all the way up the wall really, to release the nail that it was on. In that same room, I had fallen asleep on my couch. I had been dreaming that I was being choked, and it woke me up, gasping for air but struggling. I was unable to move or anything. I noticed on my chest this small animal-like shadow thing, like the ones in the closet. It was shapeless, but also animal-like, almost a cat shape. It was black or just dark purple with purple aura and eyes. Its shadowy figure formed like fangs in its open mouth like a hissing cat. Angry looking. As soon as it realized I was looking at it, It darted off to the corner, disappearing into the rest of the shadows. I was immediately able to breathe again. I turned the lights on, back to sleep till the sun came up. That was the last time the shadow thing was there that I saw. Ex-wife said some prayers. The old man in the basement still liked to mess with me, but I've since moved out. Texted my college girlfriend at like 3 a.m. after waking up from a weird dream about her talking about me and something that she needed help with. She texted back shortly after saying that her and her grandma had been talking about me a few minutes before my texts. When I was 7, I was up in me and my brother's bedroom playing with Legos. Everyone else was downstairs in the kitchen or family room, waiting for dinner, and probably watching TV. I got this weird feeling all of a sudden that something was in the room with me, and I needed to bolt. Just overwhelming fight or flight rush, and the sense that a threat was coming from the closet. I jumped up and started booking it, ran through the bedroom door, down the little hallway to the stairs. I skipped steps, and I was just so fearful. I had just reached the edge of the stairs and was turning the corner and seeing everybody down there. Right then I realized that I couldn't make out any noise. No screams, no yelling, nothing coming out of my mouth. Everything slowed down the moment that I could see my parents and siblings. Then I felt like something had grabbed me, something I cannot even describe. Slowly, I was pulled backwards, doing everything I could to make a noise or fight free. Nothing happened. I was frozen. Then a rush of being pulled back up the stairs quickly, down the hallway into my room. Everything happened at an accelerated fashion. Last thing I remember is seeing the door slam in front of me. Next thing I know, I'm walking down the stairs slowly and getting to my parents and asking them why they didn't help me or check on me. They told me that I thought I was just playing a game upstairs. I still question what happened then. Was it a weird dream? Did an alien abduct me? Was this some sort of ghost or demon? I don't remember what happened. If anything, once I was pulled back into the room, but the sense and image, or reaching my family, and safely slowing down to a moment of stillness, to then being pulled into the room so fast that I couldn't even blink. This has me open to all kinds of things about the world and the universe, and what they could hold. There's a trail in the South Carolina in the Jones Gap Park. It's called Hospital Rock, and I haven't been there in 20 years. But I hiked it a couple of times alone. It was little visited because it was somewhat difficult compared to the rest of the trails there. So the first time I went, I rounded one corner, came out into this part of the trail that was basically a ridge with a drop off to the side. I got the strangest feeling that I wasn't alone. And yes, I said the. That's what they wrote. Hiking alone, you can get the heebie-jeebies sometimes. But I've been alone enough in weird places that I can tell the difference between heebie-jeebies and a real feeling. This was a matter of fact, gut feeling. First thought, an animal is around. No prob. Finished my hike. But went back a couple weeks later, again alone, and I really couldn't remember just where on the trail I had felt it. But sure enough, I rounded a bend not unlike others on the trail, and there it was. You could cut it with a knife. So I decided to take my then best friend there and I was careful to avoid telling him what I felt or where, and asked him to please let me know if he got a vibe. And sure as shit, same place, he stopped and said, "What the fuck?" I couldn't believe it, but he and I both picked it up. Never went back. Just because I got the sense that I was intruding. Apparently, the Native Americans in that area used the trail to head to the hospital rock itself, which is a jutting rock with lots of room underneath it. They took injured people there, hence its name. Never heard anyone else talk about it. But it's hella haunted by something, and I got too much respect to go where I shouldn't be.